I'm part of a startup called BitPrice, which is trying to start an exchange for virtual currencies in general, Bitcoin being one of them. And I'm also part of a group in the UK which is working with the Bitcoin Foundation in the US to potentially set up a UK chapter. So on the foundation side, that's Bitcoin specific, and it's to promote, protect, and standardize Bitcoin, talking to regulators and so on. And then on the BitPrice side, that's our business, and we're trying to set up an exchange to make money off changing currencies.
So why don't we start with Bitcoin Foundation? So this was an organization that was founded, I believe, last year in San Francisco, and the goal of the Bitcoin Foundation has been to bring together all the different players, because Bitcoin itself is an open source system. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how Bitcoin is organized, and maybe what the fundamental differences are about Bitcoin versus a traditional state currency.
Sure, yeah. Well, Richard was previously talking about open loop versus closed loop, and I think Bitcoin is the sort of ultimate open loop in that it's not run by anyone. It's not backed by a state or a government, and the trust comes from the maths. It's all open source. Everyone can see how it works, and it's maintained by a community rather than a single entity. So the Bitcoin Foundation doesn't run Bitcoin. They were set up to try and talk to regulators and other interested parties in the States. Initially, they're, as I say, trying to expand globally. And they're just trying to push it forwards as a particular example of a virtual currency, the one that they think is the best, obviously.
So tell us a little bit about the Bitcoin economy in terms of where Bitcoin is today. From my understanding, at the end of last year, there was about 50 million US dollars in Bitcoin. And in the first part of this year, there was a large run-up where in April, the total market cap of the currency passed $1 billion. In a week in April, it passed $2 billion, and then it's since fallen back down. Where is the market cap now, and where are you guys seeing the most activity within sort of the world of Bitcoin?
The market cap is now sort of 1.5 billion, somewhere around there. It's had a little ramp up again recently, and a bit of volatility the last few days. It's still very, very early days for Bitcoin, for virtual currencies in general, as you know from your experience with Ven. I think people are still trying to get their heads around exactly what Bitcoin is, because it's a store of value in one sense. I mean, the price rocketed up earlier in the year, particularly around the Cyprus crisis. And a lot of that was people not having their faith in the euro, wanting somewhere to put their money, and it was, for a lot of people, easier to use Bitcoin than gold or other traditional stores of value. And that's one side of Bitcoin, and that's been a really interesting side of it. But that isn't something that's going to take it global and challenge banks and so on. What's really interesting to me about Bitcoin is its use as a payment platform. It's very easy for me to send some money to my family in Africa or whatever else, to make micropayments, for merchants to accept it and pay lower fees. So that's the side that I think is developing quickly at the moment, where a lot of attention is now being focused, and the side that could really take Bitcoin global.
So I heard recently a number that 1 in 10 investment dollars in Silicon Valley is right now going into Bitcoin-related startups and companies, which I found totally amazing. Do you think is that something that you see from the community that you're in and the work that the Bitcoin Foundation is doing? And where do you see the growth areas within the currency for these businesses right now? Are you just buying it and waiting for it to ride up?
I don't think so at all. I mean, a problem with it is if people just buy it and hold it, then it doesn't do anything. we need it to move around. We need it to be used as money for payments. So the ETFs and so on are interesting, but I don't think those are the companies that are really going to take Bitcoin forward. So the interesting investment is in companies who are building infrastructure. Bitcoin is so early stage at the moment. I don't know if who's tried to use it, but it's not straightforward.
How many people here used or are holding Bitcoin?
So 6 or 7. So
That's actually
yeah, decent number. But you're all new finance.
I'm curious, how many of you are holding euros, and how many of you are, we're in the UK, so for the benefit of the audience, how many people here are holding euros in their portfolios right now? Okay, and then how many are holding Bitcoin in their portfolios? So, okay, so we're probably 2 to 1 euro to Bitcoin, but that's amazing considering where Bitcoin was a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting, that sort of store of value side, but as I say, I think it's interesting. It's more interesting where VC money is being invested in the infrastructure, because as I say, it's not easy to use at the moment, and it won't become mainstream until all of the services are there that normal people can use, rather than just the nerds and the libertarians. But so in Silicon Valley, a lot of money is going into it, and a lot more money has been invested in the States so far than in the UK or the rest of the world. A lot of that is down to the attention that's been given to it, and also the regulatory side of it. In the UK, people are more wary of getting involved from an investment point of view. But I mean, from the BitPrice side, we went to a few VCs a little while ago, and a lot of people were very interested. We got multiple offers of investment. Decided not to take any in the end. But there's definitely a lot of interest from investors in these very early stage Bitcoin businesses.
So we'll come back to BitPrice in a minute, and we're definitely going to talk about regulation, because I think that's actually, it's like the giant elephant Tyrannosaurus Rex in the room with regard to virtual currencies. But with regard to Bitcoin, you mentioned a minute ago this idea of a currency versus a payment rails. And I think that for traditional financial players, the idea of Bitcoin as a payment rails is actually super interesting. So can you talk a little bit about the differences between Bitcoin as a currency and as a payment rail, and what do you think are the specific opportunities and benefits around Bitcoin as rails? And for the benefit of the group and our audience online, what exactly do you mean when you say payment rails?
I didn't say payment rails, but
you sort of said you see it as a currency and as a payment system, right?
yeah, I mean, as a store of value. Yeah. So yeah, as a store of value and as a payment system. As a payment system, I think it's brilliant in terms of how low the fees are, how little trust is required, i.e. no trust, and how quickly you can send money internationally. It's.
So who do you see that replacing, or
I don't see it replacing anything. I think that this is a huge market and there's room for lots of different players. I think it will challenge all sorts of people, including MasterCard, including banks who charge high fees. I mean, Western Union charging 10% for remittances. You can send bitcoins to your family all over the world for an absolutely minuscule fee. So those sort of cross-border payments are easy to do with Bitcoin. It, like with anything, it requires a global network, and the core of that is sort of easily maintained by miners in the Bitcoin world, and it might be different in different virtual currencies, but you need local hubs, and that's partly exchanges, partly merchant services, and all sorts. But the internal sort of structure of Bitcoin makes it very easy for those payments to be sent all over the world. And the network doesn't require you to know or to trust the person you're sending money to. And I think that has a lot of extra possibilities that can be used in other ways as well. I mean, money is a way that's being used at the moment, but there have been all sorts of innovations already on top of the Bitcoin protocol in terms of messaging, secure messaging, and in terms of registering IP or domain names and so on. So the structure of the Bitcoin network is interesting in itself for a number of different reasons.
So you're saying Bitcoin is a network being able to facilitate more than, say, financial exchange, but communications exchange, potentially domain-like identity? Do you see Bitcoin moving towards becoming an identity system?
That's interesting in itself, in that Bitcoin at the moment, as has been well publicized, is sort of pseudo-anonymous. I haven't thought about the identity side of it a lot beyond the sort of payment side. I mean, in terms of Bitcoin's integration into traditional finance, I think identity is very important, and you can't interface with the other existing payment systems without having some identity. And the libertarian ideals of Bitcoin don't necessarily mesh very easily with interfacing with banks and so on if you're trying to remain anonymous. So identity does need to be built in some way. Exactly how that is, I don't know, and I think we're still very early days, and we'll see how that pans out. But there are as I say, the structure of the protocol allows for all sorts of different ideas to be built into it, and some of the things that have been suggested are great and might well be a big use of Bitcoin in the future. Some of them might just be noise in the network which needs to be taken out or put into a separate network. But you can leverage the protocol for lots of different things.
Let's talk for a second about this kind of evolution in sort of moving towards BitPrice, your other business. One of the interesting things about Bitcoin has been watching over the last year or so the rise of what they call the alt chains. So alt chains are basically these alternative currencies that are based off of Bitcoin technology, but have different characteristics. So I'm curious how you see these alt chains fitting into Bitcoin, and whether or not you think that Bitcoin will eventually, do you see it actually splintering into maybe not only multiple, but even potentially individualized currencies? Where do you see all that going in terms of these new side coins?
I think it's very interesting, all the different things that are being put in and into all these different altcoins, and I'm not personally taking a bet on Bitcoin in particular. I'm not plowing my money into this and saying this is the one. I think the virtual currencies are very interesting, and that's where I see the future. Bitcoin is one of the earlier iterations. The virtual currencies have been around for years, but Bitcoin is one that's the first one really to hit the mainstream. What we'll be using in 10 years, I don't know. Is it Bitcoin 8? Is it something else coin that we haven't even heard of yet? I'm not sure. But the interesting thing about all of these alt currencies is they all think they have an advantage over Bitcoin or a different use case. Some of those things might be advantages that are worth bringing into Bitcoin, and that can be done if the majority of the Bitcoin network agrees that it would be useful to have this new innovation. It can be brought into the Bitcoin protocol. Some of them are going for different use cases, for smaller, faster payments, that sort of thing, and then using Bitcoin as the backbone for larger payments. So it's I think at the moment they're just all pushing these different boundaries and trying to see where they could fit in, just trying out new ideas really. And Bitcoin is interesting in that it's got that media presence, and you can mention it to a lot of people who you meet in the pub, and they will actually have heard of it. So Bitcoin, with that media presence and sort of larger backing in terms of investment and so on, I think is likely for the next few years to be the sort of leading virtual currency, but not necessarily the only one, and not necessarily the one of the future.